Welcome everyone to Cyber Talk with Nikolay show, and in today's episode we're going to be discussing in a little bit details with two cybersecurity experts. LockBit. LockBit has been in the news for quite some time, but lately it's been making a lot of waves, and FBI spend a lot of time tracking them. So even the stats that LockBit are whatever they incurred on companies since 2020 are staggering. So they collected almost $91 million since 2020. So it's a pretty significant impact on the industry and especially organizations that experienced LockBit. And that's the reason for today's show. And I have online right now with me two great experts and friends of mine that some of you probably know. But without further ado, I'm going to turn over for them to do self introductions. And I have Scott Schefferman and Aaron Goldstein. So, Scott, give a few words about your wisdom and we'll go to Aaron then.
I appreciate that. Yeah, so I'm our principal strategist at Eclipsium, which is the firmware and the digital supply chain security company with an enterprise grade platform that just looks to make sure that your supply chain, all your servers and assets, etc., are free of backdoors, have their firmware updated, and that kind of thing. So I've been in that space for the last 3 years actually, and prior to that in the EDR and obviously the services industry. And in fact, I've worked with Aaron for a good long while doing DFIR during kind of the heyday of Sam and a bunch of other actors that we all came to love working against together in bonding over those extremely painful experiences. So yeah, I've been doing that, and then prior to that was 17 years supporting mostly federal and DoD space cybersecurity, primarily for the Navy. So I've got kind of a mixed bag 30-year career in cybersecurity. But yeah, Nikolay, it's always wonderful to learn from you as well on this show, and you've always been a wonderful mentor and friend over the last well, I don't know, it's probably since 2015 or so we've known each other. So thank you for having me on the show.
Yeah, hello, and thanks for having me as well, Nikolai. Good to see you and Scott. I'm Aaron Goldstein. I'm head of security operations and IR here at Todyl. Our platform is essentially a modular security platform to bring enterprise-grade security services, EDR, zero trust, and things of that to organizations of all sizes. So I've been here for about 2 years building our MXDR offering. And then prior to that, I have about 13 years of digital forensics and incident response background, flying around the country as some crazy old ransomware cases, and then staying up to date on the new stuff like LockBit today. So excited to be here.
Sound great. Thank you guys for joining in. And we'll just, without further ado, let's dive into LockBit. So a little bit history here. So LockBit, I think a known entity in the past, it's called ABCD ransomware. So, and the reason it's called ABCD because everything that they did and encrypted had extension ABCD. Not ABCD. So then over time they evolved and they had few iterations and they came back sort of from the grave and start shaking companies down or doing their deeds. So what I'd like to learn from you and your experiences, like how it's been and what you guys seen and recent breaches. We had Boeing, we had Royal Mail, and we had few others been heavily impacted. And I think Boeing is still dealing with LockBit, trying to figure out whether they're going to pay or not to pay. So haven't seen much detail since the beginning of November. But from your experience, have you looked into it? And let's just start from.
I look at LockBit as kind of this last few years version of or iteration of the kind of the Conti group, the broader Conti group of the earlier area. Before that group was kind of formally disrupted, partially taken down between TrickBot and Ryuk and all the stuff that international law enforcement is kind of striven to do. But the problem with having broken that group up is so many of those members and that overall apparatus and all those developers and all that research and tooling and all that infrastructure, even some of it's just moved into other differently named, differently run groups. A couple months ago, there was even supposition, or at least the question on the table as to whether perhaps even Stern, which had AKA Demon, who headed up the Conti group, who's still kind of someone that we can't find in terms of like belly button status of where and who he is very easily, that he may even be a part of the LockBit infrastructure. And that would be bad if it were to be true. This is, not, I guess at this point you would call this speculation or just kind of running through what the implications of that would be. But one of the reasons that would be bad is because Stern has always had a dotted line tied to the Russian GRU, has taken some direction from them, has been given a kind of a free pass to do whatever as well in return. And so my concern with LockBit is that they might just be getting started, right? Because in 2023, there was almost 1,000, so far this year, there's almost been 1,000 incidents just attributed to LockBit alone. That is massive. I mean, that's a large percentage of organizations that have really high impact kind of scenarios to their customers, to supply chain, to critical infrastructure, to health. And if you look at it, like they're that 1,000 kind of incidents are double the next two combined, right? So like Black Cat had 400 and Clop Ransomware had just under 400, and that would equal maybe 800, but LockBit's at near 1,000. And even in November, they've already had 110 incidents, and we're just 5 days after November, and those are just the ones that we know about that get reported, right? So there might be many more victims for which the industry is not aware of that did pay the ransom or are in negotiations or have been for extended periods of time. And it's just, like Aaron, I think, was alluding to, he kind of broke up in this section, but they're really, really nasty in terms of how they come at you from a negotiation standpoint. The leverage is, they have so many dials they can turn in terms of leverage they hold over you during and throughout the negotiation process. And the problem with that is that they have enough victims where they truly do and will, in fact, leak the kind of double extortion data that they've taken from you. If you don't pay and you don't play by their kind of their terms, they don't play ball the way they want you to play ball. And they do make examples out of companies. And this is really, really impactful because a lot of what we look at here at Eclipsium, not just with LockBit, but even broadly across ransomware, is that they're targeting the IT supply chain, the digital supply chain. And when they leak that kind of data, when any actor does, in fact, like that's not just public customer information or this or that we worry about with privacy implications, etc. But it's also like the fundamental foundational code for the digital supply chain. Source code, development frameworks, private keys for such. And that's leading to more and more vulnerabilities being discovered, ironically, in the digital supply chain because that information is now public. So it's intellectual property, but it's also a roadmap for the continuing next generation of attackers to develop attack methodologies, even strategic supply chain attack approaches, exploits for vulnerabilities that are discovered in that source code, etc. So it's kind of a compounding effect that groups like this have when they hit organizations like Foxconn or other organizations in the IT supply chain. So I have a tremendous amount of angst when it comes to how prolific they are and how unabated they are, how unknown some of their leadership is, how we haven't been able to successfully take them down collectively as industry and law enforcement and government and DOJ working together. That's on the roadmap. And if we had the ability to do that, we would have by now, right? So it doesn't bode well. It doesn't bode well heading into the holiday season where this activity usually goes to the roof, and even into the new year. So I don't know. What can I say? I mean, there's a reason why we're talking about them today.
Yeah, definitely. Like, thank you for that, guys, and hopefully, Aaron, to know you talking. Well, so let's move on to the next question. So you covered a lot what LockBit is about. So what they're primarily after, they're not really typical run-of-the-mill cyber criminal that they go for any kind of target that they try. So it doesn't appear to be. So they do have their assorted selection per se that they're going after and they're trying to get to those companies. So from your perspective, what have you guys seen? Do they target specific industries? Do they target like anyone who has doors open? Or how do they get themselves into the companies? Or what is their primary targets?
Well, they've always been adept at spear phishing and kind of classic ransomware attack methodologies. But as Aaron is, I'm sure, aware and has seen in the wild, they've really been hitting like the Citrix ADCs and the gateways via the Citrix bleed vulnerability, as have a lot of other actors. But that's giving them like extremely, like profoundly powerful access to that edge device, and from there it's they have nearly omnipotence to really attack the internal infrastructure and move quickly. And so it's a combination of opportunistic by looking for all the vulnerable Citrix devices that are out there, but then also choosing their targets once they've landed and gained access. And then they'll pass that initial access off because they are structured in kind of a multi-tiered organization, much like Conti have been in the past, for example. And they'll pass that off to more hands on the keyboard approaches and do more nuanced kind of TTPs in order to position the payload. And or more importantly for them, I guess equally importantly, is what information are they going to exfiltrate? How long are they choosing to maintain persistence long enough to understand things like business processes and department heads, and what are they going to understand enough to extract that information that gives them the most leverage for that organization at that point in time. It could be merger and acquisition information. It could be inventories. It could be intellectual property, like we're talking about with the digital supply chain. But they're really good at pressing that company and that leadership for with leverage, proper leverage, to extract a ransom, and to really disincentivize them at the same time to choose not to pay. Right, that the penalty for not paying is painful. Right, so I think that's how I kind of look at their TTPs at a broad level, and probably Aaron can go into more technical detail what he might be seeing.
What about you? What have you seen? What do they target?
Yeah, there's been a lot of interesting activity. Scott mentioned a number of things when they are building their, automation for exfiltrating that data. They use tools like rclone and send it to Mega and things like that. They've even got their own homebrew tools for this as well. But what you don't often see in ransomware negotiation, and what you may not read about oftentimes, is negotiations take a long time. It is not an overnight process. In most situations, when you make initial contact with a threat actor, 4, 5, 6 hours later, you might get an answer. And this continues for up to 2 weeks, sometimes longer. And as Scott was saying, they try to sway you away from not paying by threatening to release data, by talking about the employee data that they've stolen, or the mergers and acquisitions, or other intellectual property. And if you claim that you can't pay it, they will find those insurance documents. They have sent me financial documents that they've stolen showing the amount of money left in bank accounts. Significant amounts of things like that, where they're going to use that any leverage they can to push against you to make sure that you do pay that ransom. Even threats of notifying to authorities and other regulatory bodies. All of these things are really common, and unfortunately, you see it way too often. So. When it comes to the ransom negotiation and payment, the other aspect that they don't ever tell you is if you pay the ransom and you get the decryption tool, you still have to rebuild every system. You will get that data back. In most cases, databases and other files can prove to be a problem for recovery. But if you get the data back, you still need to rebuild the systems, because in almost every situation, every one of those boxes is completely just broken. They don't function very well. And then the other aspect of that, which if you're going through insurance, is oftentimes you need double the hardware and computer capability to be able to restore that onto new metal. And oftentimes insurance carriers aren't paying for new equipment. They're only paying for repair or rebuild of existing equipment. So a lot of technical issues can go into the rebuild process, even if you are going to pay the ransom.
Well, that's not cool. Seems like they trying to leverage everything possible to extract whatever information. And yeah, I've seen what you guys mentioned. That's something new that ransomware guys or cyber criminals were not doing in the past, but it seems like they passed a lot of laws and they know that they can leverage all those laws against the companies where you have to report about the incident within 4 days. It's like, hey, if I broke into your company and I don't see your reports, and let me just help you a little bit. I'm going to SEC and find all your filings, and I'm going to file to say that you have a problem that you not report. And now you're going to be fined by U.S. government for something that you should have reported and you didn't report it. So if you don't want to negotiate fairly, well,
Yeah,
kind of fairly, it's a big thing to say here.
I even had one where we were negotiating and saying, hey, look, it's just the ransom is too high. We can't afford this, which is pretty standard. And they sent us the organization's insurance policy, said, you have a $10 million policy. You had one other incident this year. Give us the rest of the money and you can still afford the IR firm that you hired to handle these negotiations. It's absolutely wild. They are very well in tune with what the actual process looks like.
I've heard them bring up also, the fact that if you pay us, we're a sanctioned company. Let me help you out. This is the OFAC method of applying to be able to pay a ransom under OFAC, and it's just like, are you serious? You're going to help the victim out, figure out how to work with sanctions laws in order to pay the ransom. I mean, how far of the dog, they know the business better than the victims do. And they know all the businesses better. They know the SEC law better. They know the insurance kind of dynamic better. They know the sanctions aspect better. They're also, I've heard, what was the victim? One of the, I think they were some kind of an MSP, not an MSSP, but they were telling them that if you pay the ransom, we're not going to go to all of your customers and tell them about this incident and then hold them ransom as well, because we can if we want to, right? So the kind of the supply chain dynamic of leveraging the fact that a victim has their own customers that might be services customers. It's
to
wild.
that point, no joke. I actually worked a case where an organization got popped, and we were dealing with the ransomware negotiation. Afterwards, one of the questions we always ask is, after we pay, is how did you originally get in? Sometimes they say, oh, we bought access through an access broker, or we did vulnerability assessment. And they were honest and said, we actually popped your MSP, we ransomed them, and they paid us, but didn't tell anyone about it. And they sent me the negotiation documents from the MSP. Well, the breach coach that was handling my client's investigation was very interested in those documents, and trying to hide a payment and then cover when your victim organizations downstream get popped. Not a good situation to be in. So almost anything can happen in those types of situations.
Anything goes. So, guys, from your perspective, like I've heard that you mentioned Citrix Blade. So, is it the only way Bit operates, and they try Citrix Blade, or there are other things that LockBit is exploiting, or what other means that they have in their disposal that they're trying to get into organizations? And once they get in, is it the only thing that they do encryption and then or exfiltration, then encryption, or they do something else, like Aaron, you mentioned? They leverage and they move to other company from MSSP, and then they do their damage there, and then I don't know, they hold somebody for ransom to say you need to provide me access to some other organizations and then pay ransom, or what have you seen and observed? But I'm more interested to find out is like, what do they leverage to get into the organizations?
So one thing that they've done really, really well, and they've adapted along with, I think, the majority of any ransomware actor of any significant ilk, is they've really targeted the edge devices, right? So today it's Citrix Bleed because it's so dumb easy to get in that way and so powerful once you have. And oh, by the way, you're knocking out a security control while you do it in the process, a primary security control, availability control, like it's a very powerful method. But they did the same thing, I believe, when they hit Accenture. Aaron, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe they hit a CVSS score 10 FortiOS vulnerability on a FortiGate device. And that gave them, again, the same kind of, when you own those devices, you truly own the majority of the stack that matters for the defender and the attacker. Like you're a lot of these boxes are tied into Active Directory. A lot of them, have access to management networks. A lot of even OT networks, like these singular edge devices facing the internet. It's even like if you look at like Black Tick, one of the Chinese government affiliated actors, they're doing the same thing, and they're what they do is they just go to their Chinese versions of Shodan, Chinese versions of exploit DB. They find the vulnerability du jour that's the easiest, dumbest exploit to both carry out, that's stable and easy to do, but as well as the ones that give them the most power. And then they just flip to their scanning tool of whatever the one is of that day, find that victimology set of potential targets, and then organize them and attack them in the right order based on what their goals are. And so, yeah, yesterday, I mean, and whatever it was when Accenture was at, that was Fortinet, but today it's Citrix Bleed, tomorrow will be something else. And when you look at a group like LockBit, again, with this massive structure, with all of these devs, with this entire apparatus of access brokers handing off to operators and then to negotiators, et cetera, like that apparatus is profoundly adaptive and will continue to adapt. So, we're talking about TTPs today and Citrix Bleed, but I mean, literally, if we gave this episode by January, it's going to be something different.
Yeah, I completely agree. It has evolved. A few years ago, I would have told you remote desktop brute forcing was the absolute most common thing you would see. Almost every ransomware case we were dealing with was going to be that. And absolutely, what Scott is saying is true. They find, the easiest to exploit vulnerabilities. They automate it, or they use an access broker that focuses on doing that to gain those. If you look through some of the underground forums, you'll see selling access to systems within a Fortune 500 environment or within manufacturing or pharma or whatever it might be. Those access brokers are going to be able to grant that. But then beyond that, just having the automated scanning, being able to do the very basics. I always tell people, APT doesn't stand for advanced persistent threat. It's adequate persistent threat. They're not going to blow some brand new 0-day that they've written themselves. They're just going to wait for something new to be released and know that the industry trend is that patching is going to take a significant amount of time. So if they're targeting those sonic walls or Fortinets or Citrix gateways, whatever it might be, anything that has access to the network to get them that foothold, they can work with, and then from there, the rest of it is almost automated. They're going to do their enumeration. Nikolay, I think one of the other aspects you were asking was around what else do they do besides exfiltrate data before they ransom. Well, they do network recon. Not only are they looking for where your backups are and where those additional juicy data points are, they're looking for those VPN tunnels and access to others. If you think that LockBit doesn't know what type of industry you're in and what your industry profile is before they hit that encryption button, you're wrong. They know exactly what the net worth of your company is. In most cases, they know the value of what you have. And if you are in the situation where you have access to other companies, they're going to weigh that and evaluate which one to target first to make sure they're going to get the most profit for it. At the end of the day, this is ransomware as a service. And so that's the idea, is they want to make as much money and extract it from as many organizations as possible.
Yeah, thank you guys for that. Definitely interesting point. And while you were talking, like I was thinking, it's like, so LockBit and Scott, you mentioned a little bit at the beginning and in your answer right now. So it's not typical cyber criminals where they found something and they use it. So it's an organization behind. So they do have their own structure and they have their roles, responsibilities, and so it's not common thing or common div that come walk through the door, steal something, and walks away. So they obviously have really well-oiled machine with all the support. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us talking about LockBit, techniques, tactics, and procedures. Stay tuned for part 2. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. For more information about these topics or IS Squared, please go to www.issquaredinc.com.